There are places in this world that were built with love in mind. Places where people go to start something new, to leave the noise behind, to close a door and say to each other, "This is just us now. This is our beginning." And then there are places that, because of something nobody could have planned, because of something that came out of the dark and changed everything in a single night, those same spaces become something else entirely. They become questions. They become stories that have no ending. They become the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it must have felt like to be there, in that room, in that exact moment, when the world as someone knew it stopped making sense. The images you are about to see are real. The suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria, the honeymoon suite of one of the most beautiful ocean liners ever built, now rests at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, more than 240 feet below the surface of the water. Divers who have gone down there, brave men and women with cameras strapped to their bodies and air tanks on their backs, have brought back something remarkable. They brought back images of a room that was once filled with warmth, with soft lighting, with the quiet hum of a ship crossing the ocean. Images that now show us something much harder to look at and much harder to look away from. This is a story built on those images. It is a story built on what we know, on what we can see, and on what we allow ourselves to imagine. Because here is the thing about a room that has been sitting underwater for decades. It does not tell you what happened inside it. It only shows you what is left. And sometimes, what is left is enough to make your heart stop. So let us begin. Not with the crash, not with the chaos, not with the rescue ships or the newspapers or the investigations that followed. Let us begin the way the night itself began, before anyone knew what was coming. Let us begin with the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria exactly as it was meant to be experienced. Let us begin with a couple closing the door behind them, listening to the ocean outside, and believing with everything they had that they were safe. The SS Andrea Doria was not just a ship. You have to understand that to understand anything that comes next. Built in Italy and launched in 1951, she was considered one of the greatest achievements in ocean travel at the time. She carried art on her walls, real art. Paintings, sculptures, tiles designed by Italian masters. She had 3 outdoor swimming pools. She had multiple restaurants. She had grand staircases and ballrooms and lounges where people dressed up in their finest clothes just to sit down for dinner. She was, by every standard of the time, a floating palace. And within that palace, there were rooms designed for specific kinds of passengers. First class, cabin class, tourist class. But there was one room, or one set of rooms really, that stood apart from everything else. A space that was not simply elegant, but intentionally intimate. A space that was designed not for entertaining guests or impressing strangers, but for 2 people who had just made the biggest promise of their lives and needed somewhere quiet and beautiful to sit with that promise for a while. The suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria was a honeymoon suite in the truest sense of the word. It was built for beginnings. When you look at the images that divers have recovered from that space over the years, you start to understand what it must have looked like when it was new. The proportions of the room suggest a generosity of design that you did not find in ordinary cabins. There was room to move, room to breathe. The kind of space where you could stand by a porthole and watch the Atlantic passing by outside and feel, genuinely feel, that the world was very large and very full of possibility. The images show us the bones of that feeling, even now, even after all these decades under the sea. Think about what it takes to build a room like that. Think about the decisions that go into every detail, the height of the ceiling, the placement of the furniture, the way light would move through a porthole at different hours of the day. Someone sat down with a pencil and a piece of paper and thought about 2 people who had just gotten married and asked themselves, what do they need? What will make them feel that this moment, this crossing, this floating between the life they had and the life they are going to have is as beautiful as it deserves to be? Those decisions, those small and careful and loving decisions, are what the images remind us of. Even when the things those decisions created have been broken apart and covered in the slow work of the sea. There is a word in English, a very old word, that people do not use much anymore. Threshold. It means the strip of wood or stone at the bottom of a doorway, the thing you step over when you go from one room to another. But it also means something bigger than that. It means the line between one state of being and another, the line between before and after, the line between who you were and who you are becoming. A honeymoon suite is a threshold room. It is a room you walk into as one version of yourself and out of as another. And the images we have of the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria carry that meaning in them, buried under the sediment and the coral and the years, but still there, still present, still waiting to be felt by anyone willing to look closely enough. Now let us talk about what happened. Not in graphic detail, not in the way that turns tragedy into spectacle, but in the way that gives you enough to understand the weight of what we are looking at when we look at those images. On the night of July 25, 1956, the SS Andrea Doria was approaching the coast of Massachusetts. She was hours away from New York Harbor. Passengers were finishing their last dinner at sea, saying goodbye to friendships made during the crossing, packing their bags, feeling that particular mixture of excitement and sadness that comes with the end of a journey. And then, in a fog so thick that visibility was almost nothing, another ship appeared. The MS Stockholm, a Swedish-American line vessel heading in the opposite direction, struck the Andrea Doria on her starboard side. The collision happened at approximately 11:10 at night. The hole torn into the side of the ship was enormous. Water poured in with a force that nothing could stop. The Andrea Doria began to list, to tilt sideways, almost immediately. And because she was listing so severely, half of her lifeboats became impossible to use. The ship that had been designed to be one of the safest on the ocean was suddenly, terrifyingly vulnerable. What happened in the hours that followed was a complicated story of survival and loss, of ships that came to help, and of people who were saved, and of people who were not. In the end, 46 people died. More than 1,600 survived. The Andrea Doria herself sank the following morning, slipping beneath the surface of the Atlantic just before 10 o'clock, less than 11 hours after the collision. She took with her everything that was inside her. The art, the furniture, the luggage, the letters people had written and not yet mailed, the gifts people were bringing home. She took all of it down with her into the dark, and she took the suite de lua de mel do SS Andrea Doria with her. Now here is where this story becomes something different from a history lesson. Here is where the images stop being just documentation and start being something closer to poetry. Because what the cameras of divers have captured in that sunken suite is not chaos. It is not destruction in the way you might expect. It is something stranger and, in its own way, more moving than chaos. It is stillness. It is the particular stillness of a space that was interrupted in the middle of something. Look at the images carefully. Not as a scientist looking for data, not as a historian cataloging facts, but as a human being looking at the traces that other human beings left behind. You will see furniture that has moved, not violently, not explosively, but with the slow, dragging movement of something that tilted and slid and came to rest somewhere it was never meant to be. You will see the shapes of things that were once part of a room that made sense, that had a logic to it, that had been arranged with intention. Those shapes are still there. They are just rearranged now. The room has been reorganized by forces that did not care about intention. And in that rearrangement, in the way the images show us what used to be and what is now, there is a feeling that is very hard to name. It is not exactly sadness, though it contains sadness. It is not exactly awe, though it contains that too. It is something closer to the feeling you get when you find an old photograph of a place you used to love and you realize that the place does not exist anymore. Not the way it was, not the way you remember it. The suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria gives you that feeling times 1,000, because the photograph in this case is the room itself, preserved in a way that photographs never are, preserved in 3 dimensions, preserved with weight and texture and the particular quality of light that filters down through 240 feet of ocean. There are objects in those images that stop you cold. A fragment of something that was once decorative, chosen by a designer who wanted the room to feel warm. A piece of furniture whose shape you can still make out, whose original purpose you can still understand, even though it has been transformed by decades of submersion. Things that were once part of someone's best day. Things that were once the backdrop to the kind of happiness that you only get to feel a few times in your life, if you are lucky. Seeing those things in the images of the suite de lua de mel, du SS Andrea Doria, Seeing them in the condition they are in now is one of those experiences that does something to you that you cannot entirely explain or undo. But here is what we do not know. And this is important. This is the part of the story that the images cannot tell us, no matter how carefully we look at them, no matter how many times we return to them, no matter how many divers go down with better cameras and more time and more light. We do not know who was in that room on the night of July 25th, 1956. We do not know what they were doing when the collision happened. We do not know what they said to each other in the minutes that followed. We do not know what decisions were made inside those walls. And so, in the spirit of this story, in the spirit of using what the images give us as a doorway into something the images cannot give us, let us do something that human beings have always done when they are confronted with mystery. Let us imagine. Imagine that there is a couple in the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria on that night. Not a couple we can name, not a couple drawn from any specific historical record, but a couple who could have been there, who exist within the range of what was possible on that ship on that crossing. A young couple. Maybe they got married a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and this crossing is the last leg of a trip that has already taken them to places they had only ever dreamed about. Maybe they are tired in the good way, the way you get tired after days of too much joy. Maybe they are sitting together, not talking much, just listening to the ocean, feeling the ship move beneath them, thinking about the apartment they are going back to and the life they are about to start building. And then the world shifts, not in a metaphorical way, literally. The floor moves, not the way the floor moves when a ship hits a wave. The floor moves the way the floor moves when something has gone terribly wrong. There is a sound that people who survived described in ways that were hard to write down, a sound that was not like anything they had heard before. And then the tilting begins. What do you do in that moment? What does a person do when the room they are in, the room that was built for their happiness, the room that was supposed to be the most romantic place they had ever slept, suddenly becomes a place where the furniture is sliding and the floor is at an angle and the air outside the porthole is no longer where it should be? What do you do when the beginning of your life together, the physical space of your beginning, becomes suddenly and terrifyingly dangerous? This is the decision at the center of this story. And it is not a dramatic decision. Not the kind you see in movies where someone stands at a crossroads and the music swells and the camera slowly pulls back. It is a small, fast human decision. The kind of decision that is made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Do you stay? Do you wait and see if things stabilize? Do you trust the ship, trust the crew, trust the systems that were put in place for exactly this kind of emergency? Or do you move? Do you open the door and step out into whatever is happening in the corridor and start making your way toward the deck, toward the air, toward the chance of a lifeboat? In the images of the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria, there is no answer to that question. There is only the room as it is now. The room that has been sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic for longer than most of the people watching this story have been alive. The room does not tell us what choice was made inside it. It only tells us that it was here, that it existed, that it was, once, someone's beginning. And that is, in a strange way, enough. Because the point of this story is not to solve a mystery. The point is to feel the weight of what a mystery like this actually means. The point is to sit with the images of the suite de lua de mel do SS Andrea Doria and really understand that every space we walk into has a before and an after. Every room we stand in has a history and a future. And sometimes those rooms end up at the bottom of an ocean, and all we have left are the images, and the images are enough to break your heart open if you let them. Let us talk for a moment about what it means to be a diver who goes down to a place like this. The men and women who have brought back the images we are discussing today are not ordinary people doing an ordinary thing. Going down to the Andrea Doria is considered one of the most challenging recreational dives in the world. The depth, the currents, the limited visibility, the fact that the ship is increasingly fragile after so many years of resting on the ocean floor, all of these things make it a serious undertaking. People have died attempting it. The dive is not something you do on a whim, and yet people keep going. People keep suiting up and descending and spending their precious bottom time moving through the corridors and rooms of a ship that has been dead for decades. Why? What is it that pulls them down there? What are they looking for when they point their cameras at the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria and take the images that the rest of us will look at from the safety of our screens? And it does matter. It matters because the SS Andrea Doria was not just a ship. She was a piece of post-war Italian pride, a symbol of a country rebuilding itself after devastation, a statement that beauty and craft and elegance could survive even the worst of things. She mattered to the thousands of people who crossed the Atlantic on her during her 5 years of service. She mattered to the crew members who worked on her, and the designers who built her, and the engineers who maintained her. She mattered, in a very specific and personal way, to every single person who ever walked through the door of the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria and felt, for even a moment, that the world was very beautiful, and that love was very real, and that the future was very close and very bright. The images show us a room that has been taken apart by time and pressure and the slow, patient work of the ocean. But they also show us something that time and pressure cannot take apart. They show us the shape of an intention. The intention to create a space worthy of love. The intention to give two people something beautiful to step into at the start of their life together. That intention is still visible in the images, still readable in the proportions of the room, in the design choices that you can still make out even now. Intentions do not decay the way furniture does. They last longer than wood and fabric and paint. They survive in the shapes that things leave behind even when the things themselves are gone. There is a concept that Americans understand in a very deep, very cultural way, and it is the concept of the fresh start, the new beginning. The idea that no matter what has come before, no matter how difficult or painful or complicated your history has been, you can get to a place where you draw a line and say, here is where I begin again. The honeymoon is the American embodiment of that idea in its most romantic form. It is the trip you take to mark the line. To step across the threshold from one life into another. To give yourself and the person you love a space and a time that belongs only to you, that is not yet tangled up in mortgage payments and grocery lists and all the necessary and beautiful ordinariness of a life built together. The suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria was designed for that kind of crossing. Not just the physical crossing of the Atlantic, though that too, but the inner crossing. The crossing from single to married, from individual to partnership, from the life you had built for yourself alone to the life you were going to build together. The images of that suite are images of a space designed for transformation. And what is more American than the belief that transformation is always possible, that beginnings are always available, that the future is always something you can choose? Which is what makes it so hard to look at those images, knowing what we know, knowing that the crossing did not complete itself the way it was supposed to, knowing that the ship that was carrying all those beginnings and all those transformations and all those fresh starts did not make it to the harbor. There is something in that, something about the vulnerability of hope, that strikes a very particular chord in the American experience. Because Americans believe so completely in the power of starting over, that the interruption of a start, the cutting off of a beginning before it can become what it was meant to become, carries an especially sharp kind of grief. But here is something that is also true. The story did not end in the Atlantic. Not for the people who survived. Not for the couples who had been crossing on the Andrea Doria toward a new chapter and who found themselves instead on rescue ships in the middle of the night, wrapped in blankets, looking at where the great ship used to be. Those people went on. They had to. They went on, and they built the lives they had been heading toward, maybe in different ways than they had planned, maybe carrying the memory of that night for the rest of those lives, but they went on. The beginning was interrupted. It was not canceled, and that perhaps is the most important thing that the images of the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria can tell us. Not what happened inside those walls on the night of July 25th, 1956, because that we will never know. But what happened to the human beings who were on that ship? They survived. They chose to survive. They made the decisions that needed to be made, in the dark, in the tilting, in the noise and the fear, and those decisions led them out. And afterward, they had to find a way to begin again from a place they had never expected to begin from. They had to find the threshold inside themselves, not in a beautiful room on an ocean liner, but in the harder, less decorative rooms of their own hearts. The images we look at now are images of absence as much as presence. They show us a room, but they also show us all the people who are not in it. They show us furniture, but they also show us the people who were supposed to use that furniture and did not, or used it differently than anyone had planned. They show us the suite de lua de mel do SS Andrea Doria as it is, preserved and broken and beautiful and sad, and they ask us to fill in the rest. They ask us to bring our own understanding of love and fear and hope and loss to what we are seeing and to let those things touch us. That is what images do when they are this powerful. They do not give you the whole story. They give you a doorway, and what you find on the other side of the doorway depends on what you bring with you. The divers who took those images brought their training and their courage and their reverence for a place that deserves reverence. We who look at those images bring our own lives, our own loves, our own understanding of what it means to be in a place that was made for joy and find that joy interrupted. The Suite de Lua de Mel do SS Andrea Doria is more than a room. It is more than a historical artifact. It is more than a dive site. It is a place where the full range of human experience was compressed into a very small space and a very short time. It is a place where love and danger and courage and loss all existed simultaneously, where the best that human beings can imagine for each other and the worst that circumstance can do to those imaginings came face to face. It is a place that deserves to be remembered, carefully and honestly, and with full awareness of how much we do not know and cannot know about what it held. And the images help us remember. Imperfect as they are, limited as they are, obscured by time and depth and the particular darkness of deep water, the images of the Suite de Lua de Mel do SS Andrea Doria give us something to hold on to. They give us a way of saying, this was real, this happened. This place existed and these people were here, and what occurred in this space on that night was part of a human story that matters. The images are not the whole story. They never are. But they are the part of the story that survived, that made it up from the bottom and into the light, and that is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. There is a tradition in American culture of honoring the places where important things happened. We build memorials, we put up plaques, we name parks and streets and schools after people and events that we want to remember. We do this because we understand, instinctively, that places carry memory. That the ground where something significant occurred is different from other ground, not in any supernatural way, but in the way that human attention and human meaning-making make things different. We return to those places and we stand in them, and we feel something that we would not feel standing anywhere else. And that feeling is a form of connection to people we never met and moments we did not live through. The Suite de Lua de Mel do SS Andrea Doria is a memorial of a different kind. It is a memorial that no one built intentionally, a memorial that came into being through catastrophe rather than through commemoration. And you cannot stand in it. You cannot visit it the way you can visit a park or a museum. To get to it, you have to put on equipment and descend through 240 feet of cold, dark water and accept the considerable risks that come with doing so. Most people will never go there. Most people will only ever see it through the images that those brave few bring back. But those images are enough. They are enough to create the connection. They are enough to carry the weight of what that place holds. When you look at the images of the Suite de Lua de Mel do SS Andrea Doria, you are connected to everyone who was ever in that room. You are connected to the designers who imagined it, and the builders who constructed it, and the crew members who maintained it, and the passengers who occupied it, and the divers who have documented it. You are part of a chain of human attention that stretches back to 1951 when the ship was built and forward to this moment right now as you sit and watch and listen and feel. And what you feel, that feeling, is not something that can be manufactured or faked. It comes from the reality of what the images show. It comes from the fact that this was a real place where real people lived, real moments of real joy and real fear. It comes from the human capacity to look at what remains of something and understand what it was when it was whole. It comes from love, actually. From the fact that the Suite de Lua de Mel do SS Andrea Doria was built for love and in some way that defies easy explanation, still holds traces of that love, even at the bottom of the Atlantic, even in the images that filter up through all that dark water, even now, even here, even in this room where you are watching this story unfold. There are places in this world that were built with love in mind, and there are stories about those places that refuse to stay at the bottom. They keep rising. They keep finding their way to the surface. They keep asking to be told and retold, not because we know everything about them, but because we know enough. We know that love was there. We know that fear was there. We know that in the space between those two things, between the love that the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria was built to hold, and the fear that descended on it without warning on that July night, human beings made choices. Small, fast, human choices. Choices that we will never know the specifics of. Choices that the images cannot show us no matter how long we look at them. But the choices were made. We know that much. People chose. And some of them made it out. And the ones who made it out carried with them something that no amount of ocean water could take away. They carried the memory of a room built for beginning. And wherever they went after that night, whatever version of their future they managed to build from what remained, that memory went with them. The suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria went with them, not as a room but as something harder to describe and harder to lose. As proof that even when things fall apart, even when the floor tilts and the world stops making sense, the love that was present is not canceled. It is carried forward by the people who choose to carry it. The images tell us what remains. The story tells us what to feel about it. And in the space between what remains and what we feel, there is something that might be the closest thing we have to a true account of what happened in the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria on the night that the SS Andrea Doria was lost. Not a documentary account, not a provable account, but a human account. And in the end, human accounts are the only kind that really matter. Because places do not exist for their own sake, they exist for the people inside them. And when the places are gone, it is the people who keep them alive. That is what we are doing here right now, together. We are keeping it alive. We are choosing to look at the images and feel what the images ask us to feel and carry that forward into whatever comes next. We are being, in our small way, the continuation of a story that started long before us and will last long after us. We are standing at the threshold between what was and what is, just as every couple who ever walked through the door of the suite de lua de mel du SS Andrea Doria once stood at a threshold of their own, and we are choosing to step forward into the feeling, into the story, into the particular light that comes when we agree to care about something that happened far away and long ago to people we never knew. That choice, that agreement to care, is not small. It is in fact the most human thing we do.